So, hi everyone, this is our final research show and tell, so the final week of the fourth area of research that Louisa and Tom will be taking us through. And so our next show and tell would obviously be a handover to you, but that's still to be confirmed. So yeah, this week Louisa and Tom were leading in Surrey County Council with the Highways Research Area. So over to you, Louisa.
Okay, great. So yeah, thanks everyone. Thanks for coming along. We had the final week of the research sprints, and this week we focused on highways in Surrey. And in very interesting few days speaking with a bunch of users, and Tom spoke with some stakeholders, so we'll be sharing our findings with you today. I'll start off by talking about what we found from a user's perspective. So we interviewed 8 users in total, and that was great. We managed to speak with a lot of people. Everyone showed up in person, and we identified 2 main experiences from speaking with these 8 people. One of which is reporting an issue or requesting an improvement, and the other one was a more complex journey, and this was around complex urban planning inquiries. We'll go into this in a bit more detail in a bit. Now, I understand from looking at the data that there are several reasons why people would get in touch with the council about roads and highways, but these were the 2 main journeys that we got from speaking with these 8 users. The first point is that I found that the key motivation for people engaging with the council was either around safety, so something is happening that is affecting the immediate safety of themselves or their community, but also to reduce both existing and potential negative impacts on their daily life and community. This could be anything to do with maybe traffic, road safety, it could do with parking. There's so many different reasons why people would engage, but essentially it's around either existing or potential safety issues and maybe inconveniences to people's lives. We found that users were predominantly frustrated about not feeling heard. So a lot of people said that they would engage with the council or just either get in touch, say that there's an issue, or try speaking with representatives to voice their concerns. But the fact that either their voices or their points weren't recorded, or if they were, they weren't getting a response from the council, and sometimes just not even getting a justification. So for example, if a plan is in place or something has been done and a resident doesn't agree with it, the fact that the council hasn't been able to justify those actions, just to give some background as to why things have happened in the way that they have, that was enough to frustrate some people. And finally, just not getting the reassurance that what they're asking for isn't it's not unreasonable. This word came up over and over again when speaking to users. Things like, we're only asking for the minimum, this is common sense, I'm not asking for something impossible, this isn't an unreasonable request that I'm making. So all of these things were like small but important, and if users don't feel reassured by the council, that they're not feeling heard, then it makes them feel very frustrated in this experience. We also found that this is a really subjective issue, as you can probably imagine just from the word unreasonable. What classifies as a reasonable or unreasonable completely depends where you're standing. We found, something that might not be a priority for the council might be the biggest thing in the user's life if it's their driveway that they're talking about. And people also mentioned in regards to potholes, how do you classify a dangerous pothole? Some people might classify a very tiny pothole as, a massive problem. So again, how do you classify those issues? How important are they? Will the residents and the councils agree with these classifications? So just like right at the start of our journey with planning, we saw how subjective and complex some of these conversations were. We were starting to get more in that direction with these interviews. And we also found that there was a lot of confusion from users around not only how councils are organized, but also like who's responsible for what, you know, who should they be calling? Everyone had a different answer as to who they thought was the person responsible for either parking or the yellow lines or potholes, and it varied from local to, you know, the local boroughs to districts, you know, or sometimes they just had a letter from someone in some council. They're just going to call whatever number they have and just ask around until they get through to the right person. And this confusion is something that we find later on in the research and the data that we got as well. This confusion can really lead to a lot of phone calls, and whether it's in this department or not, people might get passed on from call center to call center until they get through to the right person. I think another point that I wanted to raise is that on this point, users expect councils, other organizations and departments to be working together and to display that they are having some joined up thinking and working and collaborating. And at the moment, especially with complex urban planning inquiries, the fact that they're either getting mixed messages or hearing that maybe there are concerns about parking and traffic as a result of a planning permission that's going through, you know, any frustrations or miscommunication, and seeing that actually maybe there isn't as much joined up thinking as they would like or as they would expect, is a root of a lot of concern and frustration. As you can imagine, if you live in a community, or if you've been living in a community for decades, and stuff is happening in your community that will impact your life, and you realize that the councils aren't engaging with one another or departments aren't engaging and communicating, it's going to be a big cause of friction, and people at this point are likely to pick up the phone and want to complain or speak to someone about this, to vent their anger. And users expect councils to have an established process for commonplace issues, such as potholes, which has come up over and over again. And again, like, as much as the experience of reporting a pothole seemed a bit more straightforward than this complex urban planning one, people were still confused as to, again, what classifies a dangerous pothole. And they were really struggling to find this information. So again, if something is quite commonplace and happens a lot, they would expect the council to share this sort of information with them, or for the information to be available. And finally, this is a really interesting point. All the users that we spoke to had the sense that it's their civic duty to report issues and to engage and to work with the council to either plan or to deliver what's best for the community. And everyone says that they understand that there aren't resources to go around for everything. They understand that there needs to be some prioritization, but they see themselves as partly responsible for their community as well. And they want to be engaged and want to know that they're helping to make things better. So this was a really interesting thing that came through in terms of how people want to feel when engaging the council about these things. We created 2 experience maps for this based on these 2 main experiences, and I'll show you these in a very high level now. Please don't worry if you can't read everything that's on the screen. These will be shared with you later, and you can kind of zoom in and look at the detail. But the first one is around this complex journey and looking at, you know, complex urban planning and, you know, how does the plan impact my community? What's really interesting about this journey is that more often than not, it starts with people who are members of a residents association, and they will hear of plans to their community from a local newsletter. And they will all get together as the community, and the community will try and meet with a council representative to voice their concerns and to see how they can help to shape the plans so that they're not at any disadvantage. a key thing again here, as you can see, is that most of them just felt like they weren't being listened to, or even if they did voice their concerns, the fact that they didn't get any follow-up communications saying, this is what we heard from you, these are our plans, these are the next steps, these are the impacts on the community. They didn't feel involved in the process, and they didn't feel heard, which made the experience quite poor for themselves. And what meant is that by not being heard, they actually picked up the phone, they wrote letters, they wrote emails to councillors, to MPs. And again, just if people don't feel heard, and if they feel passionately about something, they will keep going until someone gives them some justification. So this is just a good example of how in an experience, a complex experience like this, by not communicating and even giving some acknowledgement to users throughout their journeys, they will continue to try and contact you and take up your valuable time by something that could be sorted with, with a detailed letter. The next experience map I want to show you it was a lot more straightforward, and this was around reporting an issue or requesting something to be improved. And usually it would always happen when, in person, where, something happens, especially with potholes. You notice a pothole that you want to report, or the yellow lines came up quite a lot. So things, not just like, the roads in Surrey are terrible, it's full of potholes, but also things like, we live in a village with a lot of either retired or elderly people. There's an old lady who's 92, and at the moment there's so many parked cars on our road that the ambulance can't get through. So again, it's what are the things which are causing a real impact in people's lives, and they don't have any power to do anything about it. They need the council to intervene. At this point, it brings back the search bit. Like, again, people didn't really know who to get in touch with. They didn't know who was responsible. They didn't know how long it would take to resolve the situation. But what most people do is go on Google. This has been a thing that we found across all service areas, is people will just try and Google Google for a solution. When it came to reporting potholes, for example, people did say, oh yeah, I noticed that on the website it's quite clear at the top of the page where to go and everything. So that experience, was a little bit better than in some of the other service areas that we've explored. But again, in terms of a response, it was where it gets bad again. People just wanted to feel like they had been listened to. This quote here about, it just goes into the ether. It would be nice if the council responded, if they could just tell me what they're going to do about it. One man even said, how lovely would it be if they just closed the loop and showed me showed me a pothole that had been fixed, the one that I reported. It would make me feel great, like I have done something for my community. And finally, we haven't seen that many smiley faces on our experience maps, but this is one of them. People love seeing the neon spray paint around a pothole that they've reported. They say that it's so reassuring when you actually see some action and you see good stuff happening off the back of what you've done. So there are positives, and it's really gratifying when you can do these little things that can make people have a much better experience. And just to finish off, I'd like to share a couple of quotes with you. The first one, so many people said this, like, I might not have agreed with it, but I expected some kind of response, some kind of answer, justification, or rationalization for plans, at least an awareness of some anticipated changes to traffic. So this is just going back to, it's fine. Some things will happen that I'm not 100% happy about, and that's okay, so long as I'm just told what's going on, why it's happening, instead of just being ignored. A lot of people felt ignored and felt like there was no point in engaging if they're not going to be listened to, which is a terrible experience as a resident. And finally, we're a bit demoralized about the time it's taken to do this. Most of us working in private industry, If it had taken us 6 months to respond, we would have been fired. So this was a man who was requesting double yellow lines to be put on around or near his driveway, and it took 6 months for him to get a response. The key point here is that we know that some things can happen a bit more slowly, but people do have expectations for things to happen quickly. In most day-to-day working life, if you send an email, if you don't receive a reply within a week, people consider it rude, and they will chase it up. So having some minimal response to this is just about meeting people's expectations around communication and to stop them from trying to contact you further. On that point, I'll hand over to Tom, that's going to talk about stakeholder insights and some of the data that we found so far.
Great, thank you, Louisa. So I spoke with 3 stakeholders this week. I was just Surrey, so I was up there on Monday. But despite just speaking to one council, we got really great data, some useful findings. So first of all, the majority of highways defects are already reported online via self-service. This is something that Surrey has been making a concerted effort towards. And that's demonstrated in this 10% improvement they've had year on year in terms of the proportion of defects that are being reported online. What really struck me this week, as compared to other research areas, was the very large number of different reasons for people calling. There were a lot of distinct tasks that customers are looking to complete within highways as compared to, for example, waste. We'll go into that a bit more with some data later on. Echoing Louisa's point around confusion as to responsibility, there's definitely awareness within the councils that there is confusion in terms of which councils are responsible. So is it Surrey County Council, or is it the individual borough or district councils? To the extent that even when people have a parking ticket in their hand that says their local borough council or district council on it, they'll still pick up the phone and phone Surrey. And that confusion is pretty prevalent on both the user and stakeholder side. On a similar vein, there's a lot of subcontractors and contractors within highways, and for different areas, whether that's infrastructure or vegetation, and yeah, a lot of the contractors themselves sub out the doing of the work to other parties, and there's, as well as just having that confusion over responsibility, there's technical ambiguity in that the systems don't speak to each other in a lot of cases. So if you then phone the council to inquire about an issue that was being covered by a contractor and it was recorded in the contractor's CRM, which doesn't necessarily speak to the council as one, then that first line agent isn't in a position to provide an informative response. So some sort of back-end integration issues definitely prevalent. And there are definitely emotional and complex journeys within highways. Users definitely in complex instances or these sort of passionate emotional instances definitely preferring human conversation. And there's just, given the distinct number of reasons for calling and some of the terminology being used, there is risk for chatbot confusion. So looking at the data at a top level, this slide's just looking at call volumes. So highways bottom right. So this is great. We're now in a spot we've got data from all 4 research weeks. So at face value, highways makes up a pretty significant proportion of calls, second only to revenues and benefits. So just looking at the actual volume of inbound traffic, this makes it at face value a pretty decent candidate for considering for a solution that could look at reducing call volumes. Based off based off the number of calls and the average cost per call that's been shared with us, we're able to quantify that. So just at the call volume level, you can see and these are average for a single council figures. But you'll recall from last week that this isn't the only metric worth considering. What's important now is to then start looking at the first line agent's ability to resolve those issues. And with revenues and benefits, it was such a low proportion that actually this number was a bit of an anomaly. That said, so this is now looking at the call centre's ability to handle that. In the case of highways, it's roughly 2/3 in terms of the ability for first-line agents to resolve that. That is largely the agents going through the same transaction that the person will be able to do through self-service. We already saw at the start, the majority of people are self-serving through the website. But when they phone up about highways issues, the first-line agent who's handling inquiries across multiple service areas is generally in a position to resolve those, as compared to, for example, revenues and benefits, where the vast majority were being transferred to a back office team. So once you consider call volumes blended with that resolution rate, you get a bit more of an accurate picture as to what what the potential savings within a year for a single council could be. And so the picture here is pretty strong for highways, based off that, second only to waste and recycling. You've seen this slide in all the weeks previously, but I find it useful just to remind everyone that the sort of sweet spot we're looking for with chatbot interactions is the informational or task-based sort of transactional tasks, as opposed to complex human-driven inquiries, which we've acknowledged there's definitely always going to be a place for, particularly where there's this emotional element to the human conversation. The idea here being that if you can either through self-service or through an AI or chatbot, reduce the number of inbound queries for those bottom two categories, that you'd free up human agents to provide better, quicker service in that complex bracket. Now, as I said before, lots and lots of different reasons for contact within highways, many more so than the other service areas we've looked at. The highest proportion for any single reason is only 7.7%. So they're spread out among a lot of different reasons. What is encouraging, though, is that these are predominantly in those bottom two tiers. There's not a ton of complex human conversation here. It's just a lot of different tasks and information that are being handled. But it's really interesting when you stack that up against waste and recycling. So these are all the different reasons for contact. I've stripped away any annotation here or any numbers. Point being, to capture 80% of contacts within waste and recycling, you're looking at 3 different reasons for contact. Or to put it another way, if you could answer the top 3 reasons for people making contact within waste and recycling, you would cover more than 80% of inquiries. With highways, you would need to serve 31 different inquiries to capture that 80%. So it's much more thinly distributed across a greater many reasons. Now, the reason this is important to consider is that if you're looking at an alpha chatbot, then you'd want to be considering a fairly limited area of potential domains for a chatbot to be responding to. And so in order for that to be justified through return on investment, it's far easier if you're going to be tackling off a large proportion of calls with that narrow domain that you're selecting. In highways, that's much harder because the biggest potential domain is 7.7%, whereas in waste and recycling, it's far more significant than that, as you can see. To quantify this, so looking at highways, biggest single reason for contact is potholes. 4,500 1,000 calls each year. Those calls are 7 and 7.7% of highways calls, and when you look at all the calls into the council, it's 1.3. So there's potential savings. If you were just looking at a potholes chatbot, not suggesting that we should be looking as narrow as that, but if you were just looking at that narrow domain, there's potential savings there within a year for a single council of 11.5K. Using that same methodology, within waste and recycling, the biggest single reason for contact was reporting dumped rubbish. That is many more calls, 36 and a bit thousand calls annually. Those calls for dumped rubbish, they are a massive proportion of waste and recycling calls, 38%, and in turn, a much bigger percentage of overall calls to the council. Potential savings there coming at 70K. Now, this isn't making an argument that we therefore need to do a dumped rubbish chatbot. The point being is that if we start looking at just individual domains or narrow sets of domains for chatbots, it does become very useful when you start considering that domain in the context of all inbound traffic to the councils. And yeah, in the case of dumped rubbish, there's strong justification therefore for considering it. That said, with any narrow domain chatbot, so looking even at a potholes one, if we scaled this across all possible councils within the country, and same with the dumped rubbish chatbot, if you scale that across every council, then the potential saving becomes far more significant. And in the case of something like dumped rubbish, actually the training of a vocabulary set that could cater to every council and the number of nuanced queries it's sufficiently limited that it does make it a strong candidate. But that is jumping ahead of myself. So some closing remarks. So the disparate tech systems not speaking to each other does, within highways, it does present a challenge. We've seen this in a few of the different research areas where it's a prerequisite really for considering any sort of smart solution that the back-end systems are able to speak to each other and provide that information. Otherwise, you're just going to be building a chatbot or AI assistant that ends up spitting out a phone number for you to call, which, as I experienced firsthand with the Milton Keynes Planning Commission chatbot, it's just such a frustrating experience if you've bothered to engage with this new, shiny, clever bit of tech. Then after 5 minutes of engaging with it, it just tells you to do what you would have done already. So really making and it's been so encouraging talking to Surrey this week, the amount of investment, both in terms of time and finances, that they're making in the website, in efficiencies, in trying to get more people doing self-service. The next step is definitely looking at tying together back-end systems so that the central council CRM can reflect what is taking place in third-party contractor systems as well. Yeah, Surrey is already working on reducing calls, and that's been really encouraging. Surrey is also considering or potentially stopping any mediated telephone service for highways, given that there has been such strong uptake in self-service. I think they've already started this with libraries, where now they're at a 95% self-service rate. Highways is in the 70s, but there is scope there to actually turn off the call center sort of resolution of any of these because the website is shown to work. I think the point was clearly made that we wouldn't do that without ensuring that everybody within the council was able to complete these tasks, but the goal of growing self-service is definitely to be encouraged. There's also it's on the roadmap to bring in web chat, somewhat at odds with reducing a mediated service, but I think this is a nice sign of appetite for innovation within the council. But this would really just be a sort of extension of the call center in that it would be the same agents during the same working hours, just responding via a different channel, as opposed to a chatbot which could be providing service round the clock, and without any direct human intervention. As I've already mentioned, the vast number of reasons for contact makes it harder to propose an alpha chatbot that's looking on a narrow domain, given that it would only reduce a small volume of calls in comparison to one that, like the dumped rubbish example, where it's tackling a big slice of a particular service's call volumes. But that said, within highways, there is strong opportunity to use conversational AI, and I think this ties into Louise's observations from the user side, that both in terms of providing visual classification, some objective, whilst there is an objective scale for quantifying the seriousness of a pothole, it's not something that's particularly transparent for members of the public. And it's also something that with image recognition would be very easy for a chatbot to do. But again, this theme of providing updates on issues, so many of these contacts, and we've seen this across other service areas, is people who are following up on a previous submission of a form or inquiry or complaint. And there's such potential to reduce volumes of calls by proactively informing people of updates. I'm going to sound like a broken record, because that obviously depends on CRMs being up to date with relevant data, but from a user perspective, from the council's proactive updates on status will do so much to provide reassurance and just ongoing knowledge that that's a really straightforward way to start reducing inbound call volumes. And yeah, there is this potential to also be providing resolution information. So there is this third-party system called Fix My Street. One of the big frustrations that we've seen there is both many different people reporting the same pothole. So you go on the map and it looks like there's 15 potholes on this one street. It's just 15 people have reported the same pothole, and there's no smart way of the system recognizing that that's just a single incident. AI could definitely help there. And then also on Fix My Street, this issue is that none of those flags ever disappear. Nobody ever goes into that system and marks a pothole as repaired or fixed. So the picture it paints when you go on there is that these streets are full of craters when they might well have been resolved. Again, definitely potential for an AI to be used in a system like that. And just to finish up with a stakeholder quote, so there's a real opportunity to prevent people from reporting potholes by sharing news and updates with them. We should follow the model of inform, interact, transact, and proactively push information out there. And I think that's a quote that could echo across all of the research areas. This proactive sharing of information will do so much to reduce inbound calls at a very general service level before you even start to dig into specific root causes of queries. That's it from my side. Yeah, really great data from all the channels. So really appreciate, Chris, your support in getting hold of that and lining us up with such great stakeholders to speak to.
Great. And just opening up now, I know that we focus mainly on Surrey today, but would anyone else on the call like to share any key thoughts about what we've just went through? Maybe something that, is there anything about this week that has surprised you, or anything that stood out from the work that we've done? Does anyone want to share any thoughts? Anyone from Surrey?
I was just going to say it's quite interesting seeing the comparison between the 4 different areas. the end. Definitely interesting seeing that there's so many areas to cover with highways, because obviously we're not involved with that being a district council. So it's good to see that there's differences between the 4 different areas.
Yeah, that definitely, it's really nice now that we're in a spot where we can start to look at trends between the different services. And that definitely struck me. That's only something that starts to become apparent once you're able to look at different services side by side, as opposed to just looking at planning as we did in week 1, where we didn't have the data to be comparing it with other services. So yeah, it's got more and more meaningful, our research, as we've gone on, and particularly now that we've got all 4 services covered.
Observation. I've just done a process map for going back on planning, but focusing on people that were just putting in an objection to a planning application rather than people putting in a planning application. And I sort of noted on highways the quote where it says, "We just want to be heard," or "Are we being heard?" And that sort of came through from the planning, people submitting objections.
Yeah, there is definitely overlap there. I think that people recognize that, sometimes things are going to happen, whether they like it or not, but they want to know that if it's their area of residence, they want to feel like they have a right to have a voice and they have a right to be heard. And even if it's just an acknowledgement, that will ease anxieties and sort of ease that pain point, really. You want to feel like you're part of a community and that your voice is valuable within that community. So it's something that goes quite deep with people. It matters a lot to them, even if they don't get the result that they wanted. I think it's definitely something that's kind of echoed, as you say, from planning to highways, for sure. And especially if it's not something that's like a critical, urgent, like emergency, like health and safety thing that needs to be dealt with immediately. If it is something that's a bit more subjective, then yes, definitely, just having their voices heard can go a long way. Was there anything from the data that was a surprise to anyone? I know, Chris, I think you're on the line as well. Did anything stand out for you this week?
Oh yeah, you can hear me.
Hi, yes, we can hear you.
I was surprised that potholes came up probably on the second day, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, this felt like a disconnect from, as I said to you at the beginning of the week, that I think potholes is a huge thing in terms of the media, and we're always talking about potholes, yet it's maybe not the biggest priority we think it is from the residents' point of view.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting, as you say. What are the assumptions that we have as organizations, and what are the topics that the media can choose to make a really big fuss about? But ultimately, when you look at people's concerns and what are the things which are causing the most amount of frustration, it might be that potholes are getting the most number of calls, for example, but actually, as an experience, the one where it was a lot more complex and it involved other departments, and it was not just a pothole on the road, but it was bigger issues, like there's going to be new houses and apartments being built in a community that already struggles with parking and traffic. Those are things which are way more interconnected across different departments, maybe even different councils, different organizations, and much bigger issues that can cause a lot of frustration for people. So it's always really interesting to hear that, isn't it? And to get to hear people talk about these problems and instead of just looking at the numbers.
Yeah, the other thing, it's not just about handoff from county to district boroughs. I mean, the lady who was talking about the road scheme at the top of the M23, potentially you've got highways agencies and TfL out there as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about handoff to different councils and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. And it shows as well how different organizations might have different targets that have been maybe set by the government as well. You know, things like, you know, you have to show that you're making things better for cyclists, and you have to decrease traffic on this particular road, and you have to increase the number of housing in this particular district. But are all of those targets working together, and are all of those targets being set with a bigger picture in mind? And that's when it affects the communities, that's when it affects residents, and that's when people get frustrated if they notice that maybe some of those things aren't as joined up as they would hope. It's also there was an interesting thing, it's just an anecdote, but this one lady was very frustrated when a council representative said that someone should have gone on Google Maps to look at the road that she was complaining about, or the cycle path that she was complaining about. And she was just mentioning how is it that people are making decisions that affect our lives on a daily basis, yet they have never been to the location. They haven't actually explored all avenues. They haven't looked at the road in question in person before making a decision. And again, it's that thing where they don't feel like they are being understood. They don't feel like their frustrations are actually, someone used the word apathetic, and because it is based on numbers and it's problems that need to be solved, it's not seen as a real frustration or a real problem on a human level, and just something that needs sorting. So it goes back to that feeling heard, feeling like someone has understood the struggles or the frustrations that you have, and how important that is for people. In terms of lessons learned, I guess, I can say from this week for ourselves, it was a really successful week. We did the 8 user interviews, and that was great. One thing that was very clear, with one user in particular, they came fully prepared to have a go at us and at Chris. Bless you, Chris, for taking the punches of someone who was quite ready to have a full-on rant about the roads and highways issues. And we had to take quite a few moments at the beginning of the interview to reestablish some expectations, that we were there to listen to the user, but we wouldn't be able to action or do anything about the feedback that she was providing. But I think we all found that quite challenging. What did you think about that one, Chris? As just an anecdote to share with the rest of the councils.
Yeah, just give everyone an idea. Out of the 8 interviews, stupidly I decided to sit on the wrong one. So I think it's fairly typical that if you're the one representative from the council or organisation, you have the fontable knowledge of every single service and what's going on. But I think you turned that one around very well. And she was the one who was talking about the M23 thing, about the multiple agencies involved. But, kind of interesting.
And I think it's a good example of how to frame these for any council looking to do user research moving forward. How important it is to frame the meetings so that people know the purpose of why they're coming in, and so that they know what to expect, so that they don't people don't think that they're going there to get all of their issues resolved. User research is about listening to people's journeys and issues and what's working, what's not, but it's not necessarily to be able to solve an action, every single one of those points. And it's important to frame user research as such. So that's just a really good tip for all those of you who want to do more user research moving forward. if you're going to be talking to the residents in your area, to frame research as research. Were there any kind of main lessons learned from the experience of speaking with the stakeholders or gathering data from Surrey? Was there anything there that we'd like to share with the other councils?
I don't think so. The anomaly here was that it's the only week where we've only had one data set and one set of stakeholders to speak to. Whereas ideally we'd be able to look across different data sets for different councils. No, it was nice to be able to do some face-to-face. It's the first time since week one that I was on site, and that was very beneficial.
All right. I guess then, does anyone have any questions, or is there anything that people aren't sure about in terms of everything that we've gone through today? Okay.
So I think we can talk about the next steps. So
yeah, we were just having a quick look at the chat to see if there are any questions from anyone, just in case we can't hear everyone. Just one second.
I haven't noted any specific questions coming through.
There's a conversation around potholes in the chat.
Potholes are definitely stealing the show this week.
Yeah, definitely. And whilst we're just checking this as well, again, I think there was one user, just another anecdote, that I think there was a cyclist, and they mentioned how, it's very frustrating when you talk to the council about potholes, and it's some people don't really understand why we make such a big fuss out of potholes. But the reality is that they can, create very serious accidents. And this one user who we interviewed, he had an accident while cycling with a pothole and ended up with 50 stitches on his face because of it. And not only for cyclists, but if you're driving on a road and you smash up your tire, or a tire bursts because of a pothole, it can, you can have a very serious and potentially fatal, if it's in the right circumstances, accident. So yeah, potholes is one of those things. It seems like a little annoyance, but it can actually be a very serious health risk.
So there's this question within the chat from Claire asking about chatbots. Would they not be able to deal with several topics? Absolutely, yes, they would. But I find it useful in terms of looking at a narrow scope. My reason for showing that data wasn't to suggest that we would only consider a sort of chatbot that can only deal with one topic. But in terms of agile development and starting small with something bite-sized that you can iterate on, it is useful, very useful, to be considering limited scope and limited functionality, rather than spending a ton of money on doing an all-singing, all-dancing chatbot before putting it live and being able to get any feedback. Far better to start small, iterate on it, get it out in the live, get some real feedback. Is it useful? Are people using it? Get data and improve it. And you start to learn far more quickly, and in our experience, you get far more return on your investment by having something up and live. So yes, definitely chatbots and AI, conversational AI can deal with as much as you're willing to invest and train it to. But in terms of just assessing the different areas, I found it very useful to be considering the extent to which inbound queries are dispersed across a small number or a wide number of topics, because that would have direct ramifications on the potential for an alpha. Yeah.
All right. Okay, great. So in terms of next steps then, Sophie, would you like to cover these points?
Absolutely. Obviously, over the next couple of weeks, we won't be doing any more on-site research. So all the analysis and research and data that we've been gathering over the past 4 weeks feed into our final deliverables, and those documents will be shared on Thursday the 18th. We're hoping to have agreed when the final show and tell will be sort of soon, but obviously with Neil being away, we haven't quite agreed the date when that will be. We understand it's quite difficult to get everyone in the same room, so it's probably going to be a mixture of final show similar to this that's recorded, so other people can view it the same as we are doing for these show and tells.
Okay, and at this point, just before we go, does anyone have any final questions? Any final points before we head off this Friday?
Quick question about the final show and tell. Do we know where that's going to be?
I think at the moment Neil is leaning towards show and tell at our Bristol office, because that's quite a large, nice place that many of us can fit in. However, we understand it's always going to be logistically difficult for everyone. So yeah, it's something that we'll be chatting about a bit more on that Slack channel, which Neil set up to try and come to a bit of a consensus.
Okay, and do you need anything from us all for that final show and tell? Anything additional to what we've already provided and done?
As I understand it, I believe Tom and Louisa, you've gathered all the information you can, and it's all about digesting and writing up the final deliverables.
Yes, absolutely. I think what we'll find is that when we're bringing all of these different elements together, if we do have any more questions, or if there is something pressing that comes up that we feel we need to chase on, if people are happy for us to reach out to you directly with any follow-up questions, if we do have any, then obviously then that would be beneficial.
Okay, thank you.
Great. So yes, I think that's it from us. Thanks again, everyone, for coming and for listening to us. It's always so beneficial for us to share our findings every week with everyone, and we're just really looking forward to bringing all this together. For our final deliverables, and to share this. It's bittersweet. The end of this week. We were saying earlier how it's been very, very both challenging and exciting, and we're happy to have completed like these 4 weeks of the ongoing research, but also a little bit sad for this phase to be finishing. But yes, thanks everyone very much, and I guess I'm trying to think of who to congratulate. As we usually do, we usually congratulate someone for something.
Congratulations to you guys for surviving the 4 weeks.
No, thanks, and congratulations to everyone, I guess. And thank you for making it easier for us in these last few weeks. And yeah, just to answer as well, like we have been recording these sessions, so these will be shared. If anyone wants to revisit, I'm sure Neil said that he'll be watching this late at night. It's a bit of fun. So yeah, that's it from us then. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great Friday.
Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.